What's up, my people? Welcome back. Today I'm going to be going through the basics of working with Voiceflow functions and also the complexities of them. Being able to master how to work with them will completely transform the game for your chatbots. You'll be able to implement any functionality whatsoever and be able to build really profound chatbots that drive real impact. So let's get right into it. So here I have an empty Voiceflow canvas and we'll get right into it. So let's just start by just printing out a quick message into the chatbot, just for starters, to ensure everything is working. It's just a quick hi, and when we run it, there you go, hi. So we can be able to understand how functions work. I'm going to use a specific scenario in this case. So what we're going to try to build is a function that calls our Airtable database. So in this case, making an API call to retrieve information from the database so that it can be rendered into the chat widget. Okay, so how do we do that? In this case, I have an Airtable database. Let me just show you. And what I want to do is to call this database, this specific table called availability, and it contains dates. And for each date, it has that time slots that are available for that specific day. So for example, here you see 10 to 11, 12 to 1, but for the next one, it starts from 9, so it has slots from 9 to 10. So this is the information we're trying to retrieve through the function, and yeah, let's do it. So for this, let's quickly have a capture block that will capture the date. Okay, so this is just going to simulate that let's say we have asked the user to input the date that they want to come and book in a meeting or a doctor's appointment. Then we use that date to call our Airtable database. Okay, so for this, let's first start by telling them kindly input the date you want to visit. Okay, so just a simple text. We can create some variations of it, doesn't really matter, but yeah. So once we have that, we'll have a capture block to capture their response, then save it to a variable. This variable, let's call it date. Okay, so let's create a new variable. Let's give it a name of date. Control enter to save that. Then yeah, that's it. But in this case, in actual sense, we could have several blocks before this just to have it more conversational, such that the user can say something like, I want to visit the hospital tomorrow or next week but one. Then we use the statement they've used, and we use a set AI step to be able to generate or be able to extract the actual date in ISO format. So that is the way you dates normally written like this way: year, then month, then day, that way. So this is the ISO format we're trying to have it in. So we could have a set AI step transform their input, that statement they have used, into a date in ISO format so that we can call our database, because you can see our dates here are in ISO format. Okay, so next we'll forward this to a function block, okay, that will do the API call. Okay, so create function. So let's give it a function check availability. Okay, you can give it a description, doesn't really matter. Functions to call our DB and retrieve available time slots. Create function. So this is the basics of how our function looks like immediately you enter. You'll always see it having export default async function this. So this will always be there. And standard procedure is always, before starting your function, obtain all the variables that you'll be needing to use within the functions. That is data that you'll need to use. So if you're getting some email that you've collected from your chatbot, you need to obtain it over here. So first of all, let's start by inputting the variables that we'll use within this. So first of all, we'll need our Airtable token so that we can be able to access our Airtable database. So I'll call that variable there, Airtable token. Then the next one we'll need is the date. Okay, so these are the two variables that we'll need to use within the function. Then how we retrieve those that data is we come Control X here and come and put it at the end here. So that we are trying to access arguments dot input variables. Our input variables are this. Okay, then the specific variables we want to access is the date. Okay, so you just get this from here and just Control C and come and paste it in here. Then our Airtable token. Okay, come and paste it in here. Now that's in place. So this is how you import your variables that you'll use. We don't really need this, and also this is not how we're going to structure our function, so I'll remove that. So standard procedure I always will recommend someone to use is a try catch block to run your functions. Okay, this ensures that there is error handling in place, just in case there's any error that happens during the implementation of the function. We can be able to catch that error and log that back through a debug message, so that we can use that for debugging purposes. So this is a try catch block. So try catch the error, then we'll do something over there. So first of all, try doing something. Here we'll make the API call. If there's an error, let's catch that error and exit off the function. So this is how we exit from a function in JavaScript. Return. Okay, then we say we want to follow a specific path through the function. So that's why now this in place, you need to create some paths. Okay, so the first path is if there's a successful retrieval of the data. The next is if there's a failure, so failed, success or failed. So next we want to follow a path, okay, and that path is failed. Okay, or rather let's have this as error. Okay, success and error. So this pass to the path of error. So the return keyword over here takes two properties. Can take the next, so that we can be able to pass through a specific path through the function, and you'll see that coming in handy, so don't worry. Then comma, the final one is you can pass in a trace. Okay, a trace is an array of traces that we want to send back to the Voiceflow chat widget. So for this, it's an array, so that's a list of different traces. So you can have several traces that you're sending back. And if you're not familiar what a trace is, for example, if a sentence is rendered to the chatbot, something like, "Hi, my name is Awadi, I'm here to help you," that is a statement. That is a trace of type text. If buttons are rendered within the chat widget, that is a trace of type choice. If it's a carousel containing, let's say, product images, that is a trace of type carousel. So in this case, we want to return a trace of type debug. If you run your chatbot within the Voiceflow canvas just over here, not deployed on the website or something, you normally notice that there are small messages in gray that normally appear there. So those are debug messages, and they help you to handle errors and debug whatever error that's happening in your chatbot. Okay, the good thing is these debug messages don't appear in production when you deploy it to a website or WhatsApp or Facebook, whatever. It's good for debugging during testing purposes. So here we'll pass it in here. It's a trace of type debug. Okay, and the payload is a message saying something like error while retrieving. And the error itself, so let's pass it in here. So instead of having this string that way, let's have it this way, so that we can be able to pass in a variable within it. So this is how in JavaScript you put a string in place, so that you can be able to insert variables in it. So for this, we'll use a $sign. Then within the $sign curly braces, we want to pass in error dot message. Okay, so and that's how we're able to return the debug message. So this is how you handle the errors. Now let's come into a successful retrieval. So first of all, we want to make an API call to Airtable. So for that, let's first do const response is equals to await fetch. Then we want to fetch through a specific URL. Where do we get this URL? We need to go back to our Airtable database over here. Click on your profile, then go to build a hub. So first of all, we need to create an access token, because we can't make an API call to Airtable without an access token. So for that, so create token. Let me give it a random name, token1, doesn't really matter. Add a scope. These are the scopes, or rather the permissions you want to give to anyone who has this access token. You might want them only to be able to read information from the database and not write or rather edit information. But in this case, I just want to give all permissions, because after this I can always delete the token. So add these scopes. After adding all those scopes, attach a base. I want to attach the specialty hospital database, then create the token. It appears with the access token. I copy it, okay, then done. Then I can go back to my Voiceflow over here, and what I want to do is, let me just go back here to where the canvas is. Then within the function, okay, let me select the function I want to work with, which is check availability, and immediately you notice the input variables that we need to input. We need a date and we need an Airtable token. I'll paste in my Airtable token there. Then for the date, I'll pass in the variable that we've gotten here, so that is curly braces, then I pick date. Okay, so that's how that works. I can go back to the function itself, so let me just click on it, then we can continue. So to get this URL that we need to call this specific table of availability and retrieve the necessary details, Airtable really helps a lot. So I'll go to build a hub over here, then developer docs, scroll down till you see API docs, scroll and pick the database you want to access. Then what I want to do is access the availability table, list some records. Okay, so for that I'll just copy this URL as is, so until there. Then I go back to my Voiceflow over here, then paste it over here. So instead of using the normal string type, I'll use the string that we used over here, so that we can input variables within the URL itself. Okay, so for this I'll put that in there, okay, because we'll want to filter the records by a specific Airtable formula, and that formula will include the date we're trying to access. Okay, so for that means that before we even continue any further, we need to create the Airtable formula that will filter the necessary record. So for this, we'll call this Airtable formula. Okay, and the formula itself is this one, so is where the date equals the specific date we have gotten from the user. Okay, and we need to do this function. It's called dateTimePass, that transforms the date into a date object that can call our database, because in this case, this, you can notice this is a date object. Okay, the type of field is a date, so you need to call the database with the right data. Okay, so with this in place, before inserting this formula over here, if I just go ahead and insert it over here like question mark filter by formula equals to, then I pass in the specific formula that we want to use, which is the Airtable formula. This won't work. Why? Is because anytime you're calling an API and you're passing in any variable within the API itself, you need to encode that variable. Okay, so you need to encode that specific component that you're inserting within the link itself. Okay, so how do we do this? Is a built-in function in JavaScript called encode. So I've just cut it, Control X, encode URI component, curly braces, then insert it there. Okay, then with this in place, you can easily insert it there and know that it will work. Then next, just after the link itself, we need to pass in some configuration. Okay, so the first one is the method. Okay, so the method, or rather the request type is a get request. Okay, so I'll pass in get request over there. Then in the headers, I'll pass in some configuration. The first one is authorization, which will be equal to bearer. Then I pass in our access token, which we've gotten, so that's $, then curly braces, and insert in the Airtable token that we have over here. So I can just copy that and paste it in here. Okay, so that's in place, and that's how we run the API call. The next, we want to turn whatever data that's gotten from the API call, we need to transform it into JSON so that we can use it within our Voiceflow chatbot. So for this, let's create a new variable, JSON response. Then we can do await response.json. Okay, the next, we want to ensure that actually data has been retrieved back from the API call. Okay, and how do we do that is through an if statement to check if JSON response is not empty, as well as JSON response.records is not empty. So by just leaving it as that, this means we are saying that JSON response actually has a value and is not empty. Okay, so do something otherwise, so else do something else. So in this case, we'll consider this as an error, and we'll do the same thing we did over here. So we can just copy everything that we've done over here and paste it in there. Okay, so Control C. Then in this case, we'll say the debug message is no records found. Then we can return the actual JSON response. So for this, before we do this, let's just do JSON.stringify. Then we can stringify our JSON response so that we see what has been returned from the API call. Okay, So that's how we handle error handling there. But if we've returned, we've gotten some records from the API call, we want to exit the function, okay, and pass in through the path of success. So next, you remember there are two properties we can access here, is next and trace. Okay, next tells the function where to flow through, the path to flow through. So this will be next, and we say that the path is success, and these are the paths that we explicitly stated over here. Then next is the trace. So not really, in this case we don't want to return any trace, but rather want to return some output variables. Okay, so in this case you see here there's output variables we're able to access. We want to return the date itself that we have gotten and the available slots. Okay, so we'll create another called available slots. So these are the variables returned to the Voiceflow chatbot after the API call has been made. So this is what we'll return. So next and output variables. Okay, so as I mentioned, so there's three properties we're able to access here after when we're exiting from the function. We're able to access the next keyword, which tells the function you need to flow through a specific path. Next, we can be able to access the trace keyword, which returns specific traces back to into the chat widget itself to be rendered within the chat widget itself. But also there's an output variables property that is able to return data to the chat widget itself. So for this is an object containing, the first one we want to pass in is the date itself, and this is the date that we want to get back. So let me just explain what is happening here. We want to access the JSON response has been retrieved from the API call. We want to access .records, so the specific records that have been returned, and access just the first record. Why is this? When we make the API call, it will retrieve only one record, and we are sure of that because in our database over here there are no records that have matching dates. All of them have unique dates. So it will return a list, but a list containing only one record. So we are confident that we can access it through the index of 0. Then we do .fields and access that specific date. Okay, then we want to turn it into a string. Okay, so that we can always use it to be rendered within the chat widget. Okay, so that's how we do that, and we can do the same thing for the available slots, and we do the same thing. So here's json.stringify. So we are turning whatever slots have been returned in form of a list, we're turning it into a JSON string. Okay, so with this in place, this is all we need to do for our function. So we can always go back and test it out. So let's go back to our workflow. Just ensure that the function has been saved accordingly. That's proper. So let's go to our workflow, edit workflow. Then what we want to do is run this. Okay, kindly input the date you want to visit. So we'll explicitly say 2024-09-03. So path not connect. Let's just quickly say, let's enter the function and obtain the output variables and save them to some variables within our Voiceflow agent. So how do we do that? We can quickly come here and just say curly braces, want to create a new variable called available slots, so that we can retrieve this information and render it within our Voiceflow chat widget, available slots. And for date, we'll just save it to the date variable we already have. Okay, so with this in place, we can just come in here and say if it's a success, we can just quickly render a message saying here are the available time slots. Okay, available slots. Then if it's an error, we can just quickly say a message saying error retrieving slots. Okay, so with this in place, we can press S. So that's a shortcut. Wherever you are in the canvas, you can always press S to go to the beginning. So we can start, then we can say the date is 2024-09-03. Okay, enter. An error in a function step, unexpected token, colon. So let's go back to our function and see what error is that. Oh, here in the return I've put a colon. It's meant to be just returned as is. So for this, let's exit there and go back to our home workflow. Let's run it again. 2024-09-03. Error while retrieving available slots, response is not defined. So that's the error. So I found here is the issue. So here we misspelled response. So it's meant to be response with a single S. Ensure everything else is working well. Yeah, I think that's it. So we can exit here and go back to the workflow. We can start it again and try that. 2024 0903. Okay, there you go. Here are the available time slots and the JSON for the date. So there is it. So here I'm meant to have said and the date, but doesn't really matter. You get the point. And now what we're able to do is have a JavaScript after this, because you want to render this dynamically into some buttons. So what we'll do is let's create a payload variable. So going back here, variables, new variable, let me call it payload. Okay, control enter. Then going back to the workflow here, what I can do is have a payload that will insert into a custom action block immediately after this, and the custom action block is what will handle rendering the buttons dynamically. So if you haven't viewed that video, I've done a video on rendering things dynamically within your Voiceflow chatbot, leveraging on the custom action block and the JavaScript block. So you can be able to watch that. But for this, the custom action name has to be choice, so the type of trace you're trying to render, and the action body will include the payload there. So the payload, let's create it. We'll have some buttons, an object, okay, which has some buttons, and the buttons is an array of buttons. So the first button, it has a name, okay, so the name of the button, in this case, let's insert the actual time slot itself. So before we do that, let's pass it. So for this, let's say let time slots equals to the available time slots that we have gotten, but we want to, what do we want to do is we want to json.parse it, because it was in a string, but we want to access the details within it. So what we want to do is parse it, then we'll do time slots. Okay, so in this case we'll do time slot and that specific time slot. So for this, what we'll do is let's just first create the object of the button. So the button has a name and a request, and in the request itself we have a request type, okay, which will be a string and a payload of the actual contents that we want to pass in. So this could be the time slot itself. So we could say time slot, then the time slot that we get from here. So we can just copy this as is and paste it in here. So this is how a single button looks like. Okay, so what we want to do is copy this as is. Then what we'll do is we'll do for each time slot that's within this variable called time slots. We want to loop through them and render each of those time slots into a button. So we'll say let I equals to 0 as long as I is less than time slots dot length. We want to increment the index. Then we want to do payload dot buttons dot push. So we want to push an object which represents a single button into this specific list. Okay, so payload dot buttons dot push the object that we created. So it's a button containing the name of the button, which will be time slots. Okay, but it's not time slots like that. We want to do let me control X that and do a $sign, because we're inserting a variable within a string, time slots I. Okay, so we want to access that specific time slot, and you can do the same thing for the payload itself down here containing the time slot. Okay, so with that in place, we need to turn this payload, because we're inserting it within the custom action body over here. And this custom action body, if you're inserting a variable, that variable has to be a string. So to do that, we need to stringify it. So payload is equals to json.stringify the payload itself. Okay, and with this being said, we can exit here. Then in the path here, we can just have one path, which is the default path. You can just call it path 1, and whatever name you give over here is the path that we need to pass within the button request. So this request over here, we give it a request of type path 1, because either way, whatever button they click, whatever time slot they click, we want to pass in through that one path. So for this, let's just move on. Then we can have a JavaScript after this to obtain that specific time slot that we have gotten, and we can get that from, let's just save it to our available slots variable. Okay, I'm feeling a bit lazy to create a new variable, so we'll save it over there. And you can always access the payload from the last event dot payload dot, and in the payload itself you can be able to see. Let me show you the last event. The last event is the button the user decides to click, and that event is specifically this event you're seeing over here. Okay, so last event dot payload dot time slot. Okay, so I'll do that. Last event, not here, here. Last event dot payload dot time slot. With this being said, we can stringify it. I think it's already in a string, so we'll just render it into a text message saying you've picked time slot. Okay, so you've picked, then we pass in the available slots variable, which will contain the slot that the user has picked. Okay, then what we'll do is just then start. So that is 2024-09-03. That's the date we want to access and get the time slots. Okay, so that's not working. Why? So here are the available slots. Oh, sorry. So here in the custom action, we didn't pass in the action body. So pass in payload. Okay, and before we forward, because by default the custom action block always moves to the next block, but we don't want it to move to the next block until a button is clicked, until there's an interaction with the custom action. So we need to toggle that on, stop on action. So with that, we can exit then let's start. So we want to access that specific day, 0903. Let us see. It renders those buttons there. We want to access, let's say 10 to 11. See, there you go. You've picked 10 to 11. And yeah, that's it for the video. So you've been able to understand how you can be able to work with the function block to be able to implement various functionalities into the chatbot. Being able to master this means that there's no limit to the kind of functionalities you can implement. As long as you can code, or you can prompt ChatGPT to give you the right code, you can always implement various functionality. So this is the basics of working the functions. I've also touched on working with the custom action block, which really works very well in rendering things dynamically into the chat widget, and I've also done a video on that, so you can always visit my channel and see that video. It's very comprehensive. But anyways, that's it from me. If you want to work with our team, there'll be a link in the description. Till next time, stay savvy. Peace.